Morning. Give me a second to find the video here. All right. Morning, everybody. Morning, C3 people. Let me know you're here, and we'll get going in just a second. Okay, that's done. Let me get Instagram going too. Sorry about that. Sadly, there's not an easy way to do this. All right, finally. Okay, welcome to C3's weekly podcast or weekly live event, I guess would be a better way of saying it. If you're new to C3, West Michigan's inclusive spiritual community located in Grand Haven and now located in the World Wide Web. So um, thanks for being a part of this community. Thanks for being a regular part of this community. Thanks for supporting this community, supporting these teachings and our musicians. Our musician this morning is Sam Corbin, so you're not going to want to miss that. Hang on right after this on our C3 page on Facebook, and we'll have Sam go live with some music. It's important to be listening um, to different kinds of voices, meaning musicians and artists right now during such a crazy and insane time to be alive. So it's really an honor to be able to support local musicians and sometimes not so local musicians through our weekly Facebook Live session. So anyway, thanks for your support. I am wrapping up a series here, which I've called by different names, but essentially Stories to Live By. And we're, as I've said before, we're meaning-making, story-generating, story-creating people. From the cave paintings in France, one of the earliest expressions of human storytelling on Earth, down to Netflix. We can't help it. It's part of how we make meaning. It's part of how we search for meaning. Facts are not enough, and that's actually partly what I want to talk about today. What do we mean by facts, and which facts, and facts according to whom? And I promise you I have a story in mind for just such a question. So part of what I'm saying is let's embrace the fact that we are story-making creatures, and let's ask ourselves, what kind of story are we living in? What kind of story are we living in? What kind of story are we contributing to? What kinds of stories are we ignoring? What kinds of stories are operating that are hidden in the background that continue to play out, which we are largely unconscious of to our own demise, if you will? So I want to start off with, instead of the story, I'll cover the story in a second. I want to start off with just a few questions that come from a new Netflix documentary that I watched this past week, which I highly recommend. It's called The Social Dilemma. It's dealing with the complexity of social media and social media plus, we could say. In addition to social media, just media in general, Google, and our news feeds. And what's amazing about the documentary is that they found all these uh, people inside Silicon Valley, the brains behind the things that we all use, like the like button, uh, like the very notion of relating to people through this thing that's now called social media. So, in other words, it's the experts talking about what they're doing. So, definitely watch it. Drop whatever you're doing right after this, right after this live teaching. Then watch The Social Dilemma and let it sink in. Let it let it have a voice in the cultural landscape. So a couple things that the documentary pointed out um, is how algorithms work. And of course, I'm not a technical person. I studied English in college, and I have a degree in biblical studies and comparative religion. So um, it's out of my league, which is interesting because I think that's part of um, why we say yes to the things that come through our phones and through our computer screens, because we don't understand what it is. We don't even understand how it works. How are any of us supposed to? So it kind of has like a sort of secret magic backdrop. And I don't know, okay, ask yourself this question. Have you ever been talking about something and the very next day it shows up on your Instagram feed as an advertisement? Or on your Facebook feed as an advertisement, something like that. And you're like, what the hell are people listening to me? And the answer to that is yes. Maybe not exactly in the way we imagine, like there's a big brother back there, and they're like human beings are listening in, that kind of thing. It's actually much more complicated. So in this documentary, The Social Dilemma, they're talking about how algorithms work, and I'll explain it as best I can in sort of my own layman's terms. So an algorithm is a set of complex computations that human beings invented, of course, that operate independently once they're created. So the way the algorithms work on our phones is that it catalogs and keeps track of absolutely everything we look at and for how long. So you're scrolling on your phone like this, and you pause for just a second at some kind of video, and that goes into the metadata that is being collected about you. Just pausing. Not to mention everything you Google, everything you listen to, everything you like, everything you retweet, everything you spend more than a few seconds on it, and it ranks them. And then the algorithms feed you back the kinds of things it thinks you're into. Now, I've said this before, this very thing before, at C3, but I just want you to hear me say it again directly. Absolutely everything on your feed is feeding you what it thinks you want. It's not objective. It's not that everyone sees the same news feed. It's not that everyone sees the same Facebook feed. You think you do, like, oh, I'm friends with, with so-and-so, and he or she must be seeing the same thing I am. False, 100% false. It is absolutely individualistic, we could say. Everything that comes through on your phone and on your computer, including the news. You think, hey, I'm just going to open up my computer and look at news sites, or we think about that with the television in the same way, but everything is curated, we could say. Now, why? The simple answer to that is to sell you stuff. Now, you know that. I know that. You know that. Oh, somebody's getting paid in all this. And we sort of just say something like, well, that's just the way it is. Well, that's the way it is because that's the way it was created. And more than that, what's interesting about the documentary is that the algorithms are designed to change your behavior, to make you do something, even if it's as simple as pause or like, so that they can find the social and cultural niche they think you're in to give you the things that you think you'll buy. So What is coming through on your phone is a curated experience meant to sell you something by corporations. And we know that kind of abstractly, but we don't know that when it comes to our actual behavior, the things that we're engaging in week after week after week after week. And I can see the irony that I'm giving this talk on Facebook Live. I'm not saying the tools are bad. I'm saying they don't really function like tools. Tools, like a car, takes us from point A to point B. And it's really just a mechanism that moves us. Now, I know you can infuse it with identity and meaning, and you can say, oh, I drive, a Ford, which is better than a Chevy. And, there's some social games, but we understand the utility of it. And we tend to think about the computer as a kind of tool, but that's not really how it's operating. It's actually trying to get us to do something. The car in your driveway isn't getting you to do anything. It's just sitting there waiting for you to use it. That's why it's much more like a tool. That's not what we're engaging in when it comes to our phones, mostly. So that's number one, how an algorithm works. In other words, AI is already here. I know people talk about artificial intelligence today. When the robots take over, they're already taking over because algorithms function independently. Mark Zuckerberg isn't back there reading your data, and sort of saying, oh, Kent Dobson in Ada, Michigan, he probably wants a new carbon frame triathlon bike. No, the algorithm picks up on all the things that I'm into and all the little YouTube videos that I watch, and it figures it out. And sure enough, it comes through and as an advertisement, I'm like, oh my God, I need a new, how did they know? Well, it's not that hard. So this is worth saying because, as David White says, this is not the age of information. This is not the age of information. He says, one good word is bread for 1,000. People are hungry, and one good word is bread for 1,000. We're starving in the age of data and facts that are meant to sell us something, we could say. Now, what's my point here? My point is that every news feed, every Facebook feed, every single Twitter feed, every single Instagram feed gives you what you want and wants you to change your behavior to get you to buy something. Okay? Even Google. And this is what was kind of surprising me about the documentary, The Social Dilemma, because you think if you Google long walks on the beach, whatever, I just made that up, or whatever it is that you're going to Google. This morning I was Googling the story that I want to share in just a couple of minutes. And you know how at the end of that you start to type it in and it gives you some possible, it tries to guess where you're going. Well, that is region specific. In other words, where are you in the world and where are you within a particular region within the world? In other words, it's not the same. And it also takes into account your history of Googling things. So what you think is objective, I just Googled this and up came this, is absolutely not. It's feeding you what it thinks you're already into. If you at one time Googled and read a conspiracy theory, it will think this person likes conspiracy theories and it will feed you conspiracy theories. If you at one time Googled and read 5 articles on climate change and the horrors of climate change, it will feed you more articles about the horrors of climate change. And that is incredibly important to know. That's how it works. So all of this starts to feel kind of very Big Brother-ish because it is. And one of my questions is, what does it look like to bring consciousness to these kinds of complicated questions? What does it mean to bring consciousness to these kinds of realities? Because what's happening is happening unconsciously, unto us, in other words. Now, a couple things on the psychological dimension of this, so it's clear what I'm saying. What comes through on your phone and your Facebook feed and your articles that come up through Google preys on things that keep us motivated, like our most vulnerable aspects, our need for affirmation. We know that now with teenagers and young people. Be alarmed at the rate of depression, anxiety, and suicide. I mean, we ought to. This is a much bigger deal than the coronavirus. And yes, I just said that. The rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide is a much bigger deal than the coronavirus. A virus is something we can work on and potentially come up with some sort of vaccine for. It's relatively concrete. What causes anxiety, depression, and suicide? Now we're talking about a kind of very, very serious, rich problem that cannot be easily solved. So it preys on our vulnerabilities, our need for affirmation, our fears, and our desperate need for social identity. What group do I belong in? So this leads me to point number 2. Point number 1 was what's actually happening with algorithms? What's actually happening in the curation of information that's coming our way? The second has to do with our 2-million-year-old brain. So no doubt we have a 2-million-year-old brain. And what's happening through our engagement with social media is that we haven't evolved to handle this kind of stuff. We know that. We haven't evolved to handle this kind of stuff. So let's acknowledge that even with all of our presumed sophistication, the way our brains actually work and the way our psychology actually works is that all of us fall prey to these kind of manipulative techniques. So here's something that's true about the 2-million-year-old brain. We are creatures that discriminate. Now, let me explain what I mean. We are creatures that discriminate. And here's what I mean by this. The world is so full of stimuli and what we could even call facts. It's so full of stimuli that if you didn't discriminate, if your brain automatically didn't go like this, unimportant, important, unimportant, important, pay attention to this, don't pay attention to this. If it didn't automatically do that, we would go insane. We would go absolutely berserk if we were processing everything. So it's discriminatory. That's the way our brain works. It separates things out. It's unconscious and instinctual, which leads to what people call confirmation bias. So once you're in this operative mode and your brain automatically and your unconscious is saying important, unimportant, it begins to create something like a map of the way the world works. And what we end up doing, none of us are above this, is what's called confirmation bias. I think I know the way the world works, and what I'm doing is weeding out unconsciously things that affirm the way the world works and things that do not affirm the way the world works. Am I making sense what I'm saying? So don't think about yourself as doing this very consciously, but actually unconsciously. Now, what does that have to do with social media? Well, guess what? It preys upon our confirmation bias. It knows what our confirmation bias is. Your phone knows your own confirmation bias, and so it says, here you go. So you think Trump is the worst thing that's ever happened to America? Here you go. Here's some facts that affirm your confirmation bias. Here you go. And how many of them? Well, I don't know, several million. Just as fast as the phone works. And let's say your confirmation bias is something like Biden is a socialist that's going to ruin the very fabric of America. Your phone, the algorithms, knows this, and feeds you these things. So how are any of us supposed to break that spell? And that's the language I like to use when thinking about this. It creates a kind of spell. And you're fed what you want to hear. And that actually is what makes the experience, when you discover one of your high school friends, I'm not saying I have any experience with this, When you discover that one of your high school friends is on the exact polar opposite of whatever theological, political, spiritual spectrum from you, the opposite side, and you think, wait, I was friends with this person in high school. What happened to them? And we're absolutely shocked. And we think to ourselves, aren't they reading the same things I'm reading? Don't they know the same facts that I know? And the answer to that question is they are not reading the same facts. There are simply too many facts. What they're reading and what I'm reading is things that confirm my bias. And I'm saying nobody gets out of this, not even the President of the United States, who spends time on Twitter moving his thumb like this, just like all of you. Guess what? Everything on his feed feeds his own confirmation bias. Magic. I'm suggesting this can't be very good. This can't be very good for the world. This can't be very good for us. One little side note, and then I'll get to the main story. So one of the things that the documentary said is that conspiracy theories spread 6 times faster than, I was going to say real news, whatever that is, 6 times faster than facts, conspiracy theories. Why? Because they're kind of contagious. And they tend to simplify because the facts are complicated. Now, I lived in Israel for a long time. And when someone starts talking about the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, it is so absolutely, unbelievably complicated that no cliches, no one-liners, no single actions, no ideas can sum it up. And we know that about it. But that's true of absolutely everything. But that's overwhelming. That's like too many facts out there. But conspiracy theories say, here's something simple. There's a deep state, and there are 5 people in a closed room, and this is how they're rolling things out. That's attractive to us. It's psychologically attractive. It's like tasty. It's like fast food, and we gobble it down, and it spreads 6 times as fast apparently. So the idea that facts matter. A better question is something like which facts, and according to whom. And what's the filter? And what's our confirmation bias associated with this? Okay, that's enough. That was all intro. To one of the more well-known stories from Hans Christian Andersen called The Emperor's New Clothes. And I'm going to read it to you. I'm not going to make a ton of commentary. We'll see how it goes. I might make a few little notes along the way. And maybe I'll offer a few concluding questions, but I want you to hear the story and as it is, and then begin to ask, what does this have to do with the world that we find ourselves in? Now, The Emperor's New Clothes is not a story that Hans Christian Andersen invented. It's actually very old. There's a very old Spanish version of it, and there's also a very old Indian version, East Indian version of the story. So that's what I love about this. Anyway, they even take on sort of, they get dressed up in different cultures, so to speak. And it tells us something that there must be a kind of transcendent truth that the story is trying to speak to. So I'm going to read it to you. Here is the story, The Emperor's New Clothes. Many years ago, there was an emperor so exceedingly fond of new clothes that he spent all of his money being well dressed. He cared nothing about reviewing his soldiers, going to the theater, or going for a ride in his carriage, except to show off his new clothes. He had a coat for every hour of the day, and instead of saying, as one might, about any other ruler, the kings in his council, here they always said, the emperor's in his dressing room. Dressing up, looking a certain way. This is so good. In the great city where he lived, life was always happy. Every day, many strangers came to town, and among them, one day came 2 swindlers. They let it be known that they were weavers, and they could weave the most magnificent fabrics imaginable. Not only were their colors and patterns uncommonly fine, but clothes made of this cloth had a wonderful way of becoming invisible to anyone who was unfit for his office or was unusually stupid. So they started spreading this rumor that we weave magnificent clothes, and if you can't see them, it's because you're too dull to see it, or you're not fit for the job, or in the East Indian version, what was it? They said that they were of a lower social class. What's the exact word for it? Illegitimate birth. That's it. They were of illegitimate birth. So if you can't see this magnificent clothing, you either don't belong, illegitimate birth, you're not fit for the office that you hold, or you're dull, you're stupid. So you can already feel the anxiety, you know. I wonder if I'm the kind of person who sees this fabric. And the emperor thought those would be just the clothes for me. If I wore them, I would be able to discover which men in my empire were unfit for their posts, and I could tell the wise men from fools. Yes, I certainly must get some of this woven stuff right away. And he paid the two swindlers a large sum of money to start working at once. They set up 2 looms, pretending to weave. Day and night they did this. And people brought them the finest silk and pure gold threads. Whatever they demanded, they got, and they began to work in these now empty rooms. After some time, the emperor thought, I wonder how these new weavers are getting on. I'll send some of my smartest and bravest men to go and see how they're getting on in terms of their weaving. So he sent his honest old minister. The honest old minister went to the room where the 2 swindlers sat, working at their looms. Heaven help me, he thought as his eyes flew open. I can't see anything at all. But he didn't say so. Both the swindlers begged him to be so kind as to come near to approve of the excellent pattern, the beautiful colors. They pointed to the empty looms, and the poor old minister stared as hard as he dared, and he couldn't see anything because there was nothing to see. Heaven have mercy, he thought. Can it be that I'm a fool? Can it be that I'm unfit for office? I'd have never guessed it, and my soul must know. Am I unfit to be the minister? It would never do to let on that I can't see the cloth. So minister number 1 comes in and says, I can't see it, but I better not let on that I can't see it, because then I'll be unfit for office. So the weavers send him out. He goes and tells the emperor, magnificent clothing, you wouldn't believe it. The emperor sends somebody else. And he too has the exact same experience. Now, the town started talking about the splendid cloth, and the emperor wanted to see it for himself. And he attended with his band of chosen men and women, trusted officials, and he set out to see the 2 swindlers. They arrived at the looms. Magnificent, said the 2 officials who were already duped. Just look, your majesty, what color, what design. What is this, the emperor thought. I can't see anything, it's terrible. Am I a fool? Am I unfit to be an emperor? What a thing to happen to me of all people. Oh, it's very pretty, he said, and it has my highest approval. And he nodded, and he looked at the loom, but he couldn't say that he couldn't see anything. So finally, the day came where the emperor wanted to take out this new clothing out into the procession. Before the procession, the swindlers sat up all night and burned 6 candles and set about finishing the emperor's new clothes. Then the emperor himself came with his noblest noblemen, and the swindlers each raised an arm as if they were holding something. And they said, these are the trousers, here's the coat, here's the mantle. And they made cuts in the air with huge scissors. And at last they said, now the emperor's new clothes are ready for him. And the emperor himself came, and they said, here are the trousers, and here's the coat, and here's the mantle. And all of them are as light as a spider web. And one would almost have to think, just a second. Here it is. If your imperial majesty will please take his clothes off. We will help you put your new ones on. And have a look in this long mirror at the beautiful new clothing. The emperor undressed, and the swindlers pretended to put his new clothes on him, one garment after another. They took him around the waist and seemed to be fastening something. And then they laid out his train, and they took turns going round and round and looking in the mirror. How well your majesty's new clothes look. Aren't they becoming? He heard on all sides. Oh, the pattern, it's so beautiful, it's perfect, those colors so suitable. What a magnificent outfit. Then the minister of public procession said, Your Majesty's canopy is waiting outside. Well, I'm supposed to be ready, the emperor said, and turned again for one last look in the mirror. Isn't it a remarkable fit? He seemed to regard his costume with greatest interest. The noblemen who were to carry his train stooped low and reached for the floor as if they were picking up his mantle, and they pretended to lift it high and hold it up. But they didn't dare admit they had nothing to hold. So off went the emperor in procession under the splendid canopy. Everyone in the streets and the windows said, Oh, how fine are the emperor's new clothes. Don't they fit him to perfection? And look at his long train. Nobody would confess that he couldn't see anything, for that would prove him either unfit for his position or a fool. No costume the emperor had worn before was ever such a complete success. And then finally a child said, But he's got nothing on. Did you ever hear such innocent prattle, said his father. And one person whispered to another what the child had said. He hasn't got anything on. A child said he hasn't got anything on. But he hasn't got anything on. Eventually, the whole town cried at last. The emperor shivered, for he suspected they were right, but he thought, this procession has got to go on. So he walked more proudly than ever, and his noblemen held high the train that wasn't there at all. Okay, so there is the story of The Emperor's New Clothes by Hans Christian Andersen. Now, here are a few sort of questions to think about. The first question is maybe something like this. What does this tell us about the way power works? Because after all, it is a story about a king. It's a story about an important person who is a bit narcissistic and a bit into appearance and persona and the way his outfit looks and spends a lot of time in front of the mirror, wanting to be admired. So it tells us something that when you're in a position like that, it's very important to surround yourself with people who agree with your persona, your mask, your outfit, who will prop you up. Now, you might think, oh, who is guilty of this? Almost anyone, everyone has the capacity for this kind of thing, but almost anyone in a position of power. Wouldn't I want to surround myself with people who say, look how great I am, look how amazing I am, look how, whatever, look at my power and my importance, and to surround yourself. Now, what's interesting about the story is it has this unbelievable twist to it, that everyone seems to get on board, almost in kind of a mob mentality, and try to affirm the illusion that the emperor is wearing a beautiful, magnificent outfit. Everyone gets on board, including the emperor himself. And to break out of that mold, it would be to get close to the fear of either I'm stupid, I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not fit for office, or I'm of illegitimate birth. Now, who would want to get close to those really deep psychological fears? I'm worthless, I'm stupid, maybe people know that something I don't. So even to say the way things are, there's a lot of energy in the mob mentality that says, I need to affirm what everybody else is affirming. Now that's true regardless of political position. If you want to draw conclusions, if you want to draw some parallels to the contemporary right-left thing, To break ranks is a scary thing. And here the whole town is propping up the emperor's illusion here. So it tells us something about how power and mob mentality work. It tells us something about this deep need to surround yourself with people who say yes and not challenge you, that we all have the capacity for, especially those who are in power. What else could we say about this particular story? I think the second question has to do with part number one of this talk, and that is social media. What I'd like to suggest is social media, if I can draw a direct connection, social media, meaning your Facebook feed, your Instagram feed, your Twitter, your news feed, and the things that you Google, and your YouTube watching, all are doing what the people in the story are doing. So put yourself in the emperor's position. I know it's easy to say, oh, this must be a story about Trump or something like that. I'll let you draw your own conclusions about that sort of thing, but that's almost too easy. I think the story is something like we all have the capacity to surround ourselves with illusions, meaning clothing that's not really there. And in surrounding ourselves by these illusions, social media is the thing that continues to prop them up and feed us the information. You're right. Your biases are correct. Here are the facts that support your way of life. Here are the facts that support your privilege. Here are the facts that support your political party. And here they come. Those are all the people in the streets. Meanwhile, beneath all that, we're totally and utterly vulnerable, naked human beings. That is the fundamental, naked you came into this world and naked you will go. From dust you came, to dust you shall return. You're going to die. Everything is impermanent. We're utterly, absolutely vulnerable just by the sheer nature of being alive. We don't like that. We surround ourselves sometimes with magical made-up things, and it turns out social media is the thing that supports that. In the story, it's a child who says, wait a minute, this person has no clothes on. Have you ever, by the way, been just stripped totally naked by the comment of a child? I have, many times. My own children, just absolutely cutting me down. All of my persona, my illusions I have about myself, my name, my identity. Oh, people like me. I have books. They don't care about any of that. Just can cut right through it. In the oldest version of the story, it's one of the untouchables that says, wait a minute, the emperor has no clothes. I mean, in a class system, for the very bottom to have eyes to see, there's some irony there, some beautiful irony that's happening. In the Spanish version of the story, it's someone who's a slave who can see the truth. See, this is a way, I think cultures, even slave-oriented cultures, knew there's something about our way of life that's an illusion. And sometimes it's the least desirable or the most innocent that have eyes to see. So that's maybe about as far as I want to take the story today. Do your own reading of it. It's very easy to find. I suggest you go to Wikipedia. Look for the resource section if you want to get some versions of the Emperor's New Clothes. Just read it for yourself. Let it do its work. Stories, there's always an invitation to interpret, but just to let them work. Like, what character do I identify with? What bothers me about this story? What is this story inviting me to do? Those are the kinds of questions as story-making, meaning-seeking creatures that I think is worth allowing. So that's as far as I want to go today. Thank you for being a part of this thing. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting C3. You can always do so through our website. Help us stay sustainable and alive during this crazy time. And I hope you heard something, a hint, a guess, a clue, a nudge, an invitation, a challenge, anything rising up sort of from your own depths. Hang on for Sam Corbin on the C3 page. There's no talk back. Those of you who are regular parts of C3, I'll see you at 1 o'clock in the park in Grand Haven for a socially distanced talk back / just chance to see one another. Bring a mask and bring a chair. Miss you all very much. Stay safe, and keep going on your own wild adventure.